Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Studin, and first I'd like to thank ChiroSecure for allowing me the opportunity to share this information with you. And I am so excited today because we get to talk about documentation of certifying necessary long-term chiropractic care. Let's go to the screen. There we go. So what we're going to talk about is documenting the necessity of short-term care, long-term care. We're going to talk about demonstrative verification. We're going to get into the carrier rules and assessing participation within those carriers. Now, we have a full program, and we only have 30 minutes today, but I've spent a few hours doing this, and you'll have an opportunity to really expand your knowledge for CE credit if you so choose. But again, before I move forward, let's just go and thank our sponsors, ChiroSecure. I am the Academy of Chiropractic, and I work with a company called Simverta, which I do have an interest in, for full disclosure. So I want you to know that even though you're here today, there's a lot of people behind you putting this together to give you the information you need. Now, let's talk about necessity. How does medical necessity affect coverage for my healthcare services? And we're talking the word necessity. The way your health plan defines medical necessity impacts how it decides which healthcare services it will pay for. Generally, health plans pay a portion of the bill for covered services that fit their definition of necessity. Now, it's all provided within their policy, which you really, if you're an assignee of benefits or assigned, you should have access to. But it provides that the diagnosis, treatment, cure, or relief of a health condition, illness, injury, or disease, except for clinical trials that are described within the policy. And it's necessary for an appropriate diagnosis, treatment, and cure of all of those things. So you've got to have a health condition. It's got to have an ICD code. But here's the key. It has to be within the generally accepted standards of medical care in the community, which is why you find certain political organizations in our industry weighing in on what those definitions are, because the carriers often use those to determine what's important or what's covered and what's not. So what do you need to do? Well, you have to provide a letter of medical necessity, which includes ICDs and CPTs that reflect the severity of your pathology, which is a conversation for a different day. Now, your letter of medical necessity is your E&M evaluation and management, your initial evaluation, your reevaluation. And you've got to have all those wonderful things in there we learned in school: OPQRST, onset, provocation, severity, time, etc. All of those things have to be in there. But then you have to be able to show, was there anything in the past medical history? That could be a comorbidity. Is there anything within family, social, review of systems? All of those things are critical. You need a detailed explanation of what your patient is going through. You need a whole bunch of things in there which are usual and customary in every health industry. Here's the problem. Because I consult doctors actually in 49 different states, over the past 2 decades, I've done honestly thousands of compliance reviews. And I could tell you factually, chiropractic's dirty little secret is 95% of all of our profession cuts corners and has deficient documentation, which can be constituted a violation when you're dealing with insurance industries. At the very least, it could cost you getting paid or getting care for your patients, and at the most, it could be constituted as fraud. So you've got to ensure that you're not cutting corners and you're taking the appropriate time to document. And I know it's everyone's least favorite thing, which is I spend a tremendous amount of time with doctors on helping them streamline documentation. And sometimes a good EMR system is the solution. Sometimes a good transcription service is the solution. And never is a paper appropriate solution on paper, ever. Because that's your reputation. And your documentation is 2 things: compliance, which can cost you your money, your license, or your freedom, or your reputation, which can cost you your referrals. So if you're on paper, you're giving up a tremendous amount of referrals. Again, a topic for another time. When you get denied, often medical necessity in the carrier's policy is within the accepted standards of the medical community. And it should be defined in the health plan. And you've got to be careful because there are certain organizations out there. And this is something you should, I believe, every state and national organization should mandate. Full disclosure to the organization of what percentage of your income or what insurance companies they're working for, because they're now holding positions within state and national organizations, helping to set policy. But now they're working for insurance companies as highly paid consultants. And they're saying, we're not covering this from the insurance company side because they're working for the state and national organization saying it shouldn't be covered. And there's a conflict of interest there. So they're pointing to themselves, which this is supposed to be an organization representing you and your patients. Now they're working for the insurance companies also. And that is happening today. And in my 42 years within this industry, I've seen it over and over and over again. And I think it's time for full transparency. And I mean that sincerely, because you're getting denied. Your patients are not getting their care when they should for medically necessary services, because the carriers are hiding the fact that they're paying people to rule against you. And that's important. So here's the next thing you want to do. If you have an insurance plan or a managed care plan that pays you $16, $17, $18, $19, $20 a visit and only gives you 6 visits, do you really want to be in that? Oh, but then they say you could file more paperwork for determination. Now you're paying someone $20, $30 an hour to file that paperwork. And it could take a long time for them to do that to get more coverage. And then they deny you again. And then they say, but you could send more information. And you send more information, which is reasonable, but we're going to explain how the carriers have created a better mousetrap for that. But you're going in circles and you're, deny, delay, and defend. That's the carrier's mantra. Deny by denying a claim, delay, send us more, deny it again, and then you defend it, take them to court. So the issue is do you really want to be in a plan? And and I can tell you for me, if I was in practice today and there was a plan that I knew only covered 6 visits without mandating more paperwork, there is not a chance in the world I would be involved in that carrier. Not at all. And they're making a ton of money off of you, a ton of money. So just remember that. Think long and hard before you stay. Now, when you look at what the go-to validation for care, what's the validation for care? And this is carrier preferred. Number 1 is muscle testing. Number 2 is ranges of motion. And number 3 is indexes, oswestry, neck pain, low back pain. Those are the 3 go-tos that the carriers want you to use. And it is a brilliant strategy from them. Brilliant. Because they're also lumping you together with physical therapists. And you are not a physical therapist, and your goals are totally different from physical therapy. But what you're not looking at, and that's one of the things that's overlooked by most doctors, and the carriers want to avoid this, is comorbidities. Now, what's a comorbidity? You're treating them for one disorder. They also have another disorder. Now you have them combined. There are 2 disorders right here, A and B, that might be totally separate, 2 totally different systems, but together it creates an issue, such as diabetes or arthritis or whatever. All of these things change or validate the necessity for extended care. And everything I'm going to share with you is evidenced in the literature. Now, let's look at muscle testing. The expectation in the chiropractic setting is that proper therapy will immediately improve muscle strength upon manual muscle testing, taking the patient from weak to strong. Now, I don't really have time to delve into that in this forum. In the full program we do, you can learn all about that. But this is why a grading system of muscle evaluation does not have as much significance in most chiropractic settings as it does in a physical therapy setting, whose goal is to strengthen the muscle. Our goal is to stabilize the joint. Chiropractic produces rapid responses from the reinnervation of muscles because a basic therapy required for chiropractic patient is the decompression of the nervous system. Now, and again, we don't have time to expand on this, is there bone on nerve? Yes, yes, and yes. Is it the nerve root? No, it's not the nerve root. We know that. You're getting facets, the nociceptors and the sets, the proprioceptors and nociceptors in the joint capsule. That's where all of your bone on nerve stuff, where you have the meniscoid, which helps the bone space apart and decompress that nerve. That's where it's all occurring, and that is all evidenced in the literature. And that's a whole topic for a different conversation. So therefore, when you render an appropriate chiropractic adjustment, you're going to reseed that meniscoid. You're going to take the pressure off of that nerve. You're going to relax the joint capsule. It's going to stop firing into the lateral horn, up the spinal thalamic tract, through the periaqueductal gray area, into the thalamus, ping-pong around the anterior cingulate cortex, the prefrontal cortex, the motor cortex, the sensory cortex, the hypothalamus, go efferently down to muscles, often in disparate areas to create biomechanical homeostasis, and it'll strengthen the muscles. So therefore, almost instantly, you're going to have increased muscles, but the muscles are also not balanced to hold in the right place, and it's going to pull back. You're going to have that meniscoid also unreseed because the joint is not used to being stabilized. There's still biomechanical failure, and if Wolff's Law came into play and the bone is remodeled, then it's going to constantly go back to the wrong position. Now that is a 5-hour conversation to explain it in detail. But at least you've heard it, and hopefully I'll do it enough you'll understand it. But instantly the muscles are going to start to get strong again, and range of motion is going to start to come back, because range of motion is not and we'll talk about range of motion in a minute. Physical therapy, which I'm not going to explain in this conversation, does not recede the facet meniscoid or normalize mechanoreceptors and nociception. Herein lies the physiological mechanism, as I explained for the reinnervation. So physical therapy wants to strengthen, you're done. In chiropractic, when you decompress those nerves, the mechanism I just explained, the muscles are going to strengthen, but the spasms are going to start to relax. It sounds like an oxymoron. The spasms in the body is going to it's going to shift. It's going to relax, and then the muscles will strengthen in the right place very, very quickly. But it doesn't mean the spine is stabilized. So therefore, the next thing we're going to use, okay, we're talking about muscle testing. Number 2 is actually ranges of motion. It shouldn't be number 3. We look at range of motion. And in range of motion is normalizing range of motion. When it's decreased to normal, is that the goal? Well, guess what? It isn't. But where's your demonstrable evidence for range of motion? One is a 2-piece inclinometer. You cannot eyeball it. According to the AMA Guides of Evaluation of Permanent Impairment, 5th edition, page 400, 6th edition refers back to the 5th edition for range of motion. It says you must use a 2-piece inclinometer, not a goniometer, not an orthoradial protractor. Visually, you can only say normal or restricted. So if you want numbers, you need a 2-piece inclinometer. You could use George's line with X-ray, and this came out in the 1920s, or X-ray digitizing, and X-rays are safe. You could, before you have, according to the evidence in the literature, and it's all over the literature, not just one little piece, for you to have a negative incident from radiation in any setting, you need to have 5,000 cervical X-rays. I think it's 60 thoracic X-rays and 57 lumbar X-rays. Don't quote me, but the numbers are close. Actually, it's 5,000 cervical, 100 thoracic, and 57 lumbar X-rays at one time. No one does that. It's absurd. So X-ray is not an issue. You know, the sky isn't falling. We talked about the range of motion. Now watch. If the person can go 45 degrees in flexion, is it normal? Is it 100% normal? Globally, yes, but is it a normal range of motion? And I offer to you probably not. So if you look at this person, you're seeing a 45-degree flexion. Okay, and by the way, I apologize. You're seeing the side of my face. I'm looking at a second screen on where my slides are. Kind of a computer nerd. I have 4 screens in front of me. But 45 degrees is normal, what you see here. But it's fused at C5, 6. How could this be normal? So let's look at this, each motor unit segmentally. And let's look at these, and the numbers aren't exact because I did this for academic purposes, but C23 is 6 degrees normal. C34, 6 degrees, 16 degrees. That's abnormal. C45, 14 degrees abnormal. C56, fused in the front, it's negative 5 degrees. And C67 is 14 degrees. It adds up to 45 degrees, but 4 out of 5 motor units are abnormal. The problem isn't too little, the problem is too much when the ligaments start to impair. And when the ligaments impair, now you've got a problem. And there are tools to be able to determine that. Simverta is one of those mensurating or measuring tools that tells you where there's normal versus abnormal, and you'll be able to see, verify, and validate the necessity for long-term care. The last thing we're going to look at is indexes. We talked about muscle testing, range of motion. Now we're going to talk about indexes, oswestry, neck pain index, low back index. There are issues with those. First, they are called psychometric tests or self-reporting. A psychometric test is any activity or assessment that is conducted to evaluate a candidate's performance and includes but is not limited to skills, knowledge, ability, personality traits, attitudes, and job academic potential, where they fill it out themselves. And you look at oswestry, low back, neck pain, pain disability index. And by the way, an index, when they did the research based upon the evidence in the literature, there's about 30,000 people they did this on. And you might say, oh, the more people, the better. And that is true for research. And that was done in an occupational setting. But what about my patient? What if my patient doesn't fit all the way to the left or all the way to the right? It's got to be where my patient is today. So when we look at this, according to the Scandinavian Journal of Surgery, they said there is no gold standard for measuring functional disability with spinal problems. Oswestry can be used to monitor the response to treatment and rehab, and it's based on the patient's subjective impression of their own state or disability. We looked at a research article in 2017 on shoulder indexes, on shoulder performance indexes. And the authors wrote that not only is it not valid, it's not valid because they did not look at normals and they did not look at treatment, because everyone gets different treatment for different things. So it's a significant problem when you look at these standards. There's no gold standard for that. Now, am I saying it's a bad thing? No. Would I use that for my patient? Only once, if the carrier mandated this as part of their policy. But you know what I'm going to say? Mrs. Jones used to be able to carry her baby for 30 minutes. Now she can only carry her baby after she injured her spine or hurt herself for 5 minutes. Next visit, next reevaluation, now she could carry her baby for 12 minutes or 18 minutes. Mr. Jones was a mechanic. He used to be able to reach over under the hood of the car with a wrench and tighten it. Since he hurt himself, he can no longer reach over and pull a wrench. He's changed the job from a mechanic to a service writer. So now I'll keep it real. And where did I learn that from? I learned that from a judge in New York State Supreme Court who ruled on a significant number of my cases that I testified on. And he said, he quoted every single time the real life scenario of the patient. So when you look at the patient, okay, and you look at cohorts, cohort in the scientific world is the number of people in the study. Oswestry, back pain, neck pain indexes are a cohort of tens of thousands. Mine is a cohort of one, my patient. Tell me what my patient can and can't do. So when you're looking at the carriers want to bring you down that garden path to use an index, they're actually stacking the deck against you. So you're getting an Oswestry score of 49, 30 out of 50. Let's do that. Okay, that's your Oswestry. Okay, you're in front of me and you're on the witness stand, say, let's proverbially. Doctor, can you please tell me what your patient can do on a 32 versus a 30 on the Oswestry? What can they do in real life? And your answer is, no, you can't. I promise you, you can't. Can you tell me what your patient can do less on a 28 out of 30 versus a 30? You can't. Keep it real. And when you keep it real, it's transparent. It's black and white. There's no way for anyone to say that the patient's not progressing through care, because that's also a prime parameter to determine MRI. Are they progressing through care? And that's important. Now, let's talk about comorbidities and demonstrably. Remember the word demonstrably. You have to be able to demonstrably validate these things. You have comorbidities as hypothyroidism, smoking, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. But let's talk about degenerative disc disease. And I'm not going to say arthritis because that's not the appropriate term. It's arthropathy. It's pathology within the joint, which is bone, disc, bone. But we're going to talk about degenerative disc disease. And there is a tremendous amount of evidence in the literature. And according to these folks in 2017, they wrote, in the absence of motor deficit, because if there's motor deficit, they're considering disc surgery. In the absence of motor deficits, a non-operative course of analgesia, drugs, activity modification, bed rest, and injections should be tried for several months. But yet managed care companies are giving us 6 visits over a week and a half or 2 weeks. So medicine's evidence-based solution requires months of care, whereas many chiropractic managed care companies allow 6 visits and request an unreasonable amount of documentation for the visits, making it cost-effective to render necessary care. Make wise decisions in your business to continue with those companies. But nonetheless, months of care. And it's also baked in the algorithm of carriers using the appropriate ICD and CPTs. And many of you are reluctant to use degenerative disc disease or those types of genre of diseases of arthropathy because they're going to say it's pre-existing. Well, you know what? It's okay to say things are pre-existing because it's a comorbidity. But in your notes, you have to clearly define, as a result of the pre-existing issue, this is going to make treatment longer. And there is also coding where you could use A codes and S codes and D codes, which I'm not going to get into now, to talk about, is it initial care, is it sequela care, all these different things which tell more of a complete story. Now, let's look at a mathematical demonstrative formula for determining disc degeneration. So actually, what the evidence in the literature, this just came out in 2021, it's very new. It says, and I'm going to say what it says here simply, if you take the height of the disc and multiply it by 3, it should be greater than the height of the posterior vertebra below. So 18 times 3 is 54, which is higher than 35. That's a healthy disc. But the disc below, you measure at the center portion of the disc. This is 8 millimeters. So if you take 8 times 3 is 24, which is less than 41 millimeters. So therefore, it is degenerative. 24 is less than 41. This is a degenerative disc. According to this article in 2017, it was on degenerative disc disease, can take months of care, and that should go in a macro, citing your evidence and showing your demonstrative verification of where the comorbidity is, explaining why you're going to need more care. And that needs to be put with an A code, your treatment, showing its initial care, showing why it's going to take longer, add your degenerative disc disease diagnoses in. Now, one of the things that I've done is I've taken, watch, is this degenerative disc disease here? Because there's a spur? No, this isn't degenerative disc disease. This is an arthropathy of the joint, of the vertebra, of C1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's C5. This is degenerative disc disease. Look at the height, it's less. So don't be confused between bone spurs and disc. And by the way, the natural sequela is you're going to have you're going to have a bone spur. It's just a matter of time. And it often starts in the posterior portion. So, and there's a whole host of other things in the spine, but let's not get into that. Now we're going to look at Simverta. What Simverta does, which is an x-ray, and you go to simverta.com, it does a whole lot of things. It gives you AOMSI, which gives you impairment ratings. It tells you where the ADI, atlantodental interval, is. It gives you biomechanical validation, all of these things for another conversation. It gives you biomechanical validation of where care is specifically and when a patient's getting better. It gives you a lot. But here's another thing it does. We're measuring, and it's mensurating each vertebra. The tool measures the center height of each disc comparatively to the posterior height of the vertebra. We digitize the disc height to demonstratively validate normal versus pathological. So again, this is demonstrative. It's third-party evidence. You're using a digitizing system, and you get a report that looks like this. Here's your pathology line. This is the disc height. Everything to the right of this green line is normal because the disc height is more than 1/3 or 30%, 33% of the height of the inferior vertebra. So C2-3, right up here, C2-3, non-pathological. C3-4 to the right of the green line, non-pathological. C4-5 to the right of the green line, non-pathological. C5-6 to the right of the green line, non-pathological. C6-7, the disc is deficient. It's short. It's degenerated. Now you have a pathological disc. And you could report it as so because it actually gives you demonstrable information. So, folks, you want to make everything demonstrable. And what we have found when dealing with the courts, when we deal with attorneys in PI cases, workers' comp cases, or we're dealing with insurance companies, you know what they don't like is when you have demonstrative validation. When you have demonstrative validation showing why you're right and why that patient needs more care, you've got the appropriate ICD and CPT codes that cross-link. You've got it all. There's very little they could do other than say, well, we just don't want to pay. And you know what? If I have a company that is denying me after 6 visits, I'm not going to fill out their 100-page form. It's absurd. I would say there is a comorbidity of disc degeneration. The evidence in the literature says that it takes longer. That's why this patient needs more. Now, the carrier's comeback is going to say, well, you didn't fill out our form for muscle testing and range of motion. That's what we use. And indexes, that's what we use to determine more care. They're ignoring the physiological facts that are all evidenced in the literature. Do you want to be with that company? And determine if that company has people that is retained who are also within your political systems in state and federal levels. And that's a huge issue. And I'm the only one in the industry discussing that. And that needs to be a household conversation in all 50 states, organizations, and national organizations. There needs to be transparency so the truth can be told. In the meantime, you want to automate your demonstrative validation. It just makes it easy. So listen, the most accurate progress evaluation you have, and I said this before, it's a cohort of one. Of one. Your patient. Your patient. How is your patient doing? Keep it real, keep it real, keep it real. So if you want a full program, you can go to teachdoctors.com. The course's name will be Coding and Care Plan from Acute through Rehabilitation. That's the name of this full course. You could do that. You could always contact me. You go to teachdoctors.com. It'll be my pleasure to chat with you at any time. Here's where you could reach me. Here's my cell phone number if you want to take your phone out and take a picture of that. I'm more than happy to chat with you. It's my pleasure. So listen, I'm Dr. Mark Studin. Again, I would love to thank ChiroSecure for the privilege of sharing this information. It's just a whole lot of fun. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.